Elena Hartwell stared at the framed photograph on her kitchen counter, her hands trembling slightly as she held her morning coffee. David's smile looked back at her from their wedding day, his firefighter's uniform crisp and proud. Tomorrow would mark 3 years since the warehouse fire that took him away forever. Her green eyes, now shadowed with exhaustion from too many sleepless nights, reflected a pain that never fully disappeared. Her chestnut hair, once carefully styled, was now pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Mom, I can't figure out this math problem," came Riley's worried voice from the small dining table. Elena forced a smile and walked over to her daughter, coffee cup warming her cold hands. 9-year-old Riley had inherited her father's thick brown hair and her mother's green eyes, but lately those eyes held a sadness that broke Elena's heart. Watching her daughter struggle with homework reminded Elena of all the times David had helped with schoolwork, making everything seem like an adventure. "Let me take a look, sweetheart," Elena said, peering over Riley's shoulder and trying to focus on the fractions despite her heavy thoughts. Though she worked with complex medical equipment diagnostics every day, explaining math to a 9-year-old felt overwhelming when her mind was clouded with grief. "Oh, I think I understand now." Riley's face brightened as she picked up her pencil. "This is how Dad would have done it, right?" Elena's throat tightened, but she managed to nod and gently touch her daughter's hair. "Yes, exactly right. He'd be so proud of you." 3 years ago, David had died in the line of duty when a burning warehouse collapsed during a rescue operation. The investigation had cleared him of any wrongdoing, but his family, particularly his mother Victoria, had never stopped blaming Elena for his choice to become a firefighter. Their small apartment near the hospital wasn't much, but Elena had tried to make it warm with photos of David and Riley's artwork on the refrigerator. Her technical certifications hung modestly on the wall next to David's posthumous Medal of Valor. "Grandma Victoria and Aunt Natasha are coming today, aren't they?" Riley asked, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Elena caught the unmistakable fear that flickered across her daughter's face. "They're bringing Tyler too. We're having lunch too, to remember Daddy." Riley nodded without saying anything and bent back over her homework, her small shoulders tensing. Elena felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, but she pushed the worry aside. Family was family, even when it felt like walking through a minefield. Victoria Hartwell had been a high school principal for 30 years before retiring, and she'd never let anyone forget her authority. After David's death, she'd made it clear that she considered Elena responsible for leading her son into danger. Living alone in the old Victorian house where David had grown up, she spent her time organizing church committees and community events, always reminding people of her family's standing in the neighborhood. "That woman never deserved my David," Victoria would tell her bridge club friends while discussing Elena's inappropriate job. Working nights around all those men, neglecting her duties as a wife and mother. Behind her criticism lay a deeper resentment that Elena continued to live and work while her precious son was gone forever. Meanwhile, David's sister Natasha struggled to make ends meet as a freelance hairstylist. She lived in a cramped apartment with her 11-year-old son Tyler, constantly borrowing money from her mother and resenting Elena's independence. She dressed in flashy clothes and wore heavy makeup to hide her insecurities, but her bitterness toward Elena was becoming harder to disguise. "My brother's widow thinks she's so strong and capable," Natasha would mutter to anyone who'd listen. "But she can barely keep that child in line without David around." Her jealousy had grown sharper since David's death, especially when Elena managed to keep working and supporting herself. Tyler, unlike his mother, was a sensitive and observant boy. He remembered his uncle David with pure love and tried his best to be kind to Riley. "Riley, honey, we need to get ready," Elena called, glancing at the clock with growing anxiety. Riley slowly closed her notebook and slipped it into her backpack. She reached for her mother's hand and asked quietly, "Mom, do we have to stay long today?" "We'll come home right after lunch, I promise. And remember, I have to work 3 night shifts starting tomorrow, so you'll be staying with Grandma and Auntie." Elena squeezed her daughter's small hand, trying to offer comfort she didn't fully feel. She was scheduled for 3 consecutive 12-hour shifts at the hospital because they desperately needed the overtime pay. It was exhausting work, maintaining and repairing medical equipment through the night, but the extra money was essential. Riley would be staying with David's family during those 3 days. Even though she maintained a polite relationship with Victoria and Natasha for Riley's sake, Elena always felt a cold undercurrent of hostility. She'd noticed the way they sometimes spoke to Riley when they thought she wasn't listening, but she told herself it was just their way of processing grief. "They're David's family," Elena whispered to herself, looking once more at his photograph. "They loved him too. I need to go over this one more time. Riley's dinner is in the fridge, just heat it up. Her allergy medicine is on the counter, don't forget the evening dose." Elena pressed the phone against her ear as she changed into her scrubs, her voice tight with worry. The hospital's night shift was about to begin, and she'd be working 3 consecutive 12-hour shifts. "Elena, you've told me this 5 times already," Victoria's voice carried sharp irritation. "I raised my own son perfectly fine. I think I can manage one little girl." Elena winced at the coldness in her mother-in-law's tone. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I know you're capable. I just worry because you think we can't handle our own family responsibilities?" Victoria cut her off. "Focus on your work. Riley will be fine with people who actually care about David's memory." The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her phone. Riley had seemed especially quiet that morning, clinging to Elena longer than usual before school. "Mom, do you really have to work so many nights?" she'd asked, her green eyes wide with worry. Even though Riley had stayed with Victoria and Natasha before, something felt different this time. "Elena, you're up," her supervisor called from across the equipment room. Elena shoved her phone into her locker and headed toward another long night of maintaining life support machines. The third night shift had been brutal, 2 ventilator breakdowns and an emergency repair on the cardiac monitors. Elena's back ached as she finally headed to the break room at 4 a.m. Riley would still be asleep at Victoria's house. She pulled out her phone, expecting to see the usual photos Victoria sent of Riley doing homework or eating breakfast. Instead, there were no messages at all. For 3 days, Victoria had barely responded to Elena's texts, sending only brief replies like "she's fine" and "stop worrying." Elena tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. Maybe they're sleeping, she told herself, but unease gnawed at her stomach. She attempted to focus on calibrating the next set of machines, but David's voice echoed in her memory, "Trust your instincts, Elena. They're usually right." At 6 a.m., her phone rang with an unknown number. "Is this Elena Hartwell? This is Dr. Martinez from Boston Children's Hospital Emergency Department." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Yes, this is Elena Hartwell. Your daughter Riley was brought in about an hour ago. She's suffered a serious fall and has head trauma. We need you here immediately." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "She's supposed to be with her grandmother. The family called the ambulance. She's in surgery now. How quickly can you get here?" Elena's hands shook as she ended the call and immediately dialed Victoria's number. It rang once before Victoria's groggy voice answered. "Elena? Why are you calling so early?" "Victoria, what happened to Riley?" "The hospital just called me." There was a pause, then an almost casual laugh. "Oh, that girl. She's always getting into trouble. She probably climbed somewhere she shouldn't have." Elena felt her world spinning. "What are you talking about?" "She's in the hospital with head trauma." "Well, that's unfortunate." Victoria's voice held no emotion at all. "Children need to learn to follow rules. Where is Natasha?" "Put her on the phone." "Elena?" Natasha's voice sounded annoyed. "What's all this fuss about?" "Riley is in the hospital." "What happened?" "Look, she wouldn't listen to us. We told her to stay inside, but she wandered off. Kids fall down sometimes. It's not our fault." Elena couldn't breathe. Her daughter was fighting for her life, and David's family was treating it like a minor inconvenience. "Get to the hospital right now." Elena screamed into the phone. "Calm down. You're being dramatic." "She'll be fine," Natasha said dismissively. Elena hung up and ran toward the exit, her mind reeling with terror and rage. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. 6 hours later, Elena stood outside the pediatric intensive care unit, her face drained of color from the frantic drive across the city. Her work scrubs were still wrinkled, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she listened to the doctor's devastating words. "Mrs. Hartwell, your daughter fell from a 2-story roof. She has a severe concussion, a fractured left arm, 3 broken ribs, and internal bleeding. She's stable now, but it will take time for her to wake up." Elena's legs nearly gave out as she approached Riley's room. The door opened to reveal her little girl lying motionless on the hospital bed. Riley's head was wrapped in white bandages, her left arm immobilized in a cast, and tubes snaked from her small body to beeping machines. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor was the only sound filling the sterile silence. Elena collapsed into the chair beside the bed and carefully took Riley's uninjured hand. The skin felt cold and fragile, like porcelain. Tears she'd been fighting finally spilled over. "Mommy's here, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't here to protect you." The door burst open, and Victoria and Natasha walked in. Elena looked up and felt her blood freeze. Victoria was impeccably dressed in a navy blazer and pearls, as if she'd just come from a church committee meeting. Natasha wore a bright pink dress and full makeup, completely inappropriate for a hospital visit. Neither woman showed any sign of distress or remorse. "Well, you certainly got here fast," Victoria said with cool detachment. "I told you there was no need for all this hysteria." Elena slowly stood, fury building in her chest like a wildfire. Something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. Her daughter was fighting for her life, and these women looked like they were attending a social event. What exactly happened? Elena demanded, her voice deadly quiet. "I want every detail." Victoria and Natasha exchanged a look that made Elena's skin crawl. "Riley climbed onto the roof by herself," Natasha said with a careless shrug. "We told her not to, but she didn't listen. By the time we found her, she'd already fallen." Elena's mind reeled. Riley was cautious to a fault, afraid of heights, and would never disobey adults so recklessly. "You're lying," Elena said flatly. "Both of you, get out of this room until you're ready to tell me what really happened." Victoria's face flushed with indignation, but they left without argument. Elena returned to Riley's bedside and gripped her daughter's hand like a lifeline. She would find out the truth, no matter what it cost her. Elena sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at untouched coffee that had long gone cold. She hadn't left Riley's side except for these brief moments to use the restroom or force herself to eat something. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes hung loose from not eating. Elena. She turned to see David's former fire chief, Captain James Morrison, approaching her table. He was a tall, weathered man in his 50s who had been like a father to David. His face was grim with concern. "Captain Morrison." Elena stood as he embraced her gently. Even though David was gone, Morrison had kept in touch, checking on Elena and Riley during holidays. His presence now felt like a lifeline. "I came as soon as I heard." "How is she?" "Still unconscious, but the doctors are hopeful," Elena explained quickly. She told him about Riley's injuries and the disturbing behavior of Victoria and Natasha. Morrison's jaw tightened with each detail. "That doesn't sound like Riley at all," he said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "David always said she was the most careful kid he'd ever known." "I know Victoria and Natasha are hiding something, but I don't know how to prove it." Morrison leaned forward. "I still have contacts in the police department. Let me make some calls." They walked together toward Riley's room. When Morrison saw the small figure surrounded by medical equipment, his face cracked with emotion. He gently touched Riley's bandaged forehead. "Your daddy would be so proud of how brave you're being, sweetheart," he whispered. "Uncle Jim is here now." The next afternoon, Elena was dozing in the chair beside Riley's bed when Captain Morrison returned with a police detective. "Elena, this is Detective Sarah Chen. She needs to speak with you." Detective Chen was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in child abuse cases. She sat down across from Elena with a serious expression. "Mrs. Hartwell, we received a report from Tyler's school counselor. Your nephew apparently told his teacher something disturbing about the day of Riley's accident." Elena's heart pounded. What did Tyler say? The details are still being verified, but his account differs significantly from what your in-laws reported. The school counselor felt it was serious enough to contact Child Protective Services. Detective Chun leaned forward. We'd like to interview Tyler formally, with proper support present. Morrison squeezed Elena's shoulder. Whatever happened, we'll get to the bottom of it, he said firmly. 3 hours later, in a quiet room at the hospital, Elena and Morrison sat across from 11-year-old Tyler. The boy looked fragile and scared, flanked by a child advocate and a lawyer. Tyler, you're not in trouble, Elena said gently. Just tell us what really happened. Tyler's voice was barely a whisper as he stared at his hands. They always said mean things about Riley when you weren't there. Grandma called her that brat who killed my son. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. What happened the day she fell? Grandma said Riley needed to clean the gutters because it was Uncle David's anniversary and the house had to be perfect for him. Tyler's words came in broken fragments. I told them I could do it, but Mom said Riley needed to learn respect. They made her climb up there even though she was crying. Elena gripped the edge of the table. I tried to help her when she slipped, but I couldn't catch her, Tyler sobbed. After she fell, Grandma told Mom to wait before calling the ambulance. She said they needed to get their story straight first. Detective Chun took careful notes as Tyler described the delay, the coaching, the threats to keep quiet. Tyler, you did the right thing by telling the truth, she said when he finished. We have enough evidence to make arrests. That evening, Elena stood in the hospital corridor when she saw Victoria and Natasha being led away in handcuffs. Victoria's face was a mask of fury and denial. This is all your fault, Elena, she screamed. You killed my son, and now you're destroying this family. Natasha sobbed hysterically. Tyler is lying. You turned him against us. Elena looked at them with a mixture of disgust and pity. Riley woke up an hour ago, she said quietly. She remembers everything you said to her on that roof. It was a lie, but watching Victoria's face crumble told Elena everything she needed to know. The woman's arrogance dissolved into panic, confirming every horrible detail. You used my daughter's grief against her, Elena said, her voice steady despite her rage. You blamed a 9-year-old child for her father's death and nearly killed her because of your own guilt. As the police car pulled away, Morrison put his arm around Elena's shoulders. David would be proud of how you protected her, he said softly. This nightmare is finally over. A nurse appeared at Elena's elbow. Mrs. Hartwell? Riley is asking for you. Elena ran toward her daughter's room, tears of relief streaming down her face. For the first time in days, she could breathe again. A heavy silence filled the grand courtroom of Suffolk County Superior Court. The spectator seats were packed with reporters and community members as the prosecution prepared closing arguments against Victoria Hartwell and Natasha Hartwell. Elena sat rigidly in the front row, staring at the backs of the two women who had once been her family. Victoria's silver hair had turned completely white during the trial, and Natasha's usual flashy appearance had been replaced by a drab, defeated look. I'm here with you, Captain Morrison whispered, squeezing Elena's hand. He sat beside her in his dress uniform, having taken leave to support her through the trial. The ordeal had been devastating, but it had also shown Elena who her real family was. Riley wasn't in court today. 3 months after the accident, she was physically recovered but still attending therapy twice a week to heal the emotional trauma. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, District Attorney Rebecca Martinez stood to address the room. She was a formidable woman known for her fierce advocacy for children. This case represents the worst kind of betrayal, family members who deliberately endangered a child and then tried to cover it up. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Martinez methodically presented the evidence, photos of the dangerous roof, Tyler's recorded testimony, and medical records showing the delayed ambulance call. The defendants forced a 9-year-old girl to perform dangerous work as punishment, then prioritized their own reputation over her life when she was critically injured. Several jurors visibly recoiled at the crime scene photos. Elena closed her eyes when images of Riley's broken body appeared on the screen. The memory still haunted her nightmares. Most compelling was the testimony of 11-year-old Tyler Hartwell, Martinez continued. Despite his fear, he found the courage to tell the truth and save his cousin's life. Morrison had been working with child services to ensure Tyler received proper care. The boy was now in a loving foster home and slowly healing from his own trauma. The defense attorneys looked defeated. Their weak arguments about misunderstandings and accidents crumbled against Tyler's detailed testimony. The next morning, Judge Kenneth Smith delivered the verdict with grave authority. Victoria Hartwell and Natasha Hartwell, you have both been found guilty of child endangerment and failure to render aid. Elena held her breath as the judge continued. Victoria Hartwell, you are sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay $300,000 in restitution to the victim. Victoria's face went ashen. Her comfortable retirement was over. Natasha Hartwell, you received 2 years probation and supervised visitation with your son for the next 3 years. Natasha collapsed in sobs. Losing daily contact with Tyler was her worst nightmare come true. Both defendants are permanently banned from unsupervised contact with minors. As Elena left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but she walked past them silently. Captain Morrison shielded her from the cameras until they reached his car. How do you feel? He asked as they drove away. Elena stared out the window at the city passing by. Empty, she said honestly. Like I'm grieving people who never really existed. They drove to the rehabilitation center where Riley was attending her afternoon session. Through the window, Elena watched her daughter laughing with her therapist during art therapy. Riley was drawing a picture of a house with 3 stick figures in front. Mom. Captain Jim. Riley called when she saw them. She ran over with her artwork, her face bright with genuine happiness for the first time in months. Look, I drew our new house. The one near the fire station. Elena knelt down and hugged her daughter tightly. They had found a small rental house just blocks from Morrison's station, where he could help watch Riley during Elena's night shifts. It's perfect, sweetheart, Elena whispered. Our fresh start. As they walked to the car together, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. The nightmare was finally over, and they were free to build a real family based on love, not obligation. 1 year later, autumn leaves danced in the yard of a small house near Boston Fire Station 19. Riley was shooting baskets with her school friends, her laughter echoing through the neighborhood. At 10 years old, she had grown stronger and more confident than ever before. Great shot, kiddo. Captain Morrison called from the porch where he was grilling burgers for the children. His presence had become a cornerstone of their new life, providing stability and father figure guidance that Riley desperately needed. Elena watched from the kitchen window, a warm smile spreading across her face. She had negotiated flexible hours at the hospital, allowing her to work mostly day shifts and be home when Riley needed her. Mom, can Tyler come over next weekend? Riley asked, bouncing the ball as she came inside. Of course, sweetheart, Elena replied, ruffling her daughter's hair. Tyler was thriving in his foster family and had been visiting regularly. The cousins were slowly rebuilding their bond, united by their shared trauma and healing. Elena and Morrison had been covering Tyler's therapy costs, ensuring he received the support he needed. There's mail for you, Morrison said, entering the kitchen with a serious expression. He handed Elena an envelope with familiar handwriting. It's from Victoria, Elena said, her stomach tightening. Morrison frowned. What does she want now? Elena quickly scanned the letter. Money for legal fees. She's trying to appeal her conviction. Since their sentencing, both Victoria and Natasha had lost everything. Victoria was serving her prison term while fighting mounting debts, and Natasha was struggling with minimum wage jobs and supervised visits with Tyler. What will you do? Morrison asked, watching Riley play happily outside. Elena crumpled the letter without hesitation. Nothing. Riley and Tyler are safe now. That's what matters. Morrison nodded approvingly. David would be proud of the mother you've become. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Riley teach her friends a new basketball move. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd recognized the signs earlier, Elena admitted quietly. Stop. Morrison said firmly. You protected your daughter when it counted most. That's what real parents do. Elena smiled, feeling the weight of guilt finally lifting from her shoulders. Outside, Riley made a perfect shot and her friends erupted in cheers. A fresh start, Elena whispered to herself. She had learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, protection, and unwavering support. In the golden afternoon light filtering through the trees, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete peace. They were finally home.